What's going on, guys? Sensible Prepper Live. Sorry, we've had a little technical difficulty. Kind of blame it on YouTube a little bit. We've had some trouble getting connected. So, um, great to have you guys with us today. We're going to talk about something today that we've actually addressed on a long form video in a sense, but we're just going to talk about are Iranian and maybe Hezbollah, are they credible threats? Are there sleeper cells here in the U.S.? Is there any danger? And we're going to kind of go through some things. There are some, there is some, some exaggeration. There always is, and it's according to where you're standing. And then there are those that just kind of poo-poo the idea off. And it was funny in the video we were talking about upgrading your EDC for sleeper cells. And then there were a few comments in there, and I thought we really need to address this a little further and talk about some of the issues that are in front of us. First off, of course, obviously, with the Israeli-Iran conflict that has been going on for the past month, and hopefully a lot of that's kind of calmed down some. We have had some increased threats. In fact, President Trump, he was at the G7 meeting, and the Iranians sent a message saying that if you attack us, we're going to activate sleeper cells. Now, some of you guys are like, well, we've been talking about that for years, and we have. Listen, when I was a young man, I remember I was dating this girl, her best friend was dating a guy that was actually Jordanian, super nice guy. Don't really think he was involved in anything, but because of his Middle Eastern contact, there were a lot of Middle Eastern people that were flowing in and out when we would be over at their place. And a lot of times there were groups that would kind of huddle together. They'd leave, they'd come back, they'd leave. It was a really strange kind of situation. And this really was around the time of the U.S. Embassy that was where the hostages were taken at the U.S. Embassy. And that made it made a big deal with a lot of people. And there were a lot of heightened threats. Obviously, with 9/11, that also kind of reinvigorated the jihadist mindset here in the U.S. Is there a possibility of attacks? And so, there's been a long history. Also, there have been, in fact, there's one here in South Carolina. It's a training camp that is run. The thing is there's not really, there has to be some credible evidence, but there's definitely some training camps not too far from here. And that's been known for a long time. In fact, they're all over the U.S. A lot of the DHS and FBI, they kind of monitor these things and, to make sure that there's no laws being broken. And sometimes there are camps that have been taken over. So DHS, Border Patrol, FBI have all given out warnings lately saying you need to be aware. We're not saying that there's an imminent attack. In fact, there's not been really, there have been some just things that have gone on where they've arrested people prior to any kind of attack. There have been a number of those, but it's not rampant. It's not all over the U.S. That could change. And so we're going to talk, though, a little bit about some of the reasons why we need to be prepared and really how to be prepared. Because, guys, we're preppers. We like to be prepared. And these things that we'll talk about will actually serve you well in any situation. So that's one of the big things, that we always want to stay. But this gives us a point to be able to kind of focus on, for lack of a better term. So last year, there were 1,750 Iranian nationals that came over the border, actually in the past 4 years, that were actually caught on the border. Half were just released, not vetted, anything. The other half were sent back. And that's the ones that they actually documented. Now, that's when the borders were kind of porous and a lot of people were pouring into the country. There were a lot of other countries that were Islamic background. Doesn't mean that they're all jihadist, obviously, but there have been thousands. In fact, I think at one point there was over 100,000 that had crossed the border, that were documented to cross the border, and from a number of different countries. Now, are these dangerous? Not necessarily. In fact, I would say probably most of them aren't. But there have been a number of people that have been arrested that were part of the terror watch list. So, we just want to kind of, in fact, there was 382. That's a considerable number. And then you have to consider that those guys didn't want to get caught. And so are there others that were what they call the getaways? Did they just slip into the country? It's one of the problems with having more of an open border policy is you're letting a lot of people in, not necessarily those that are seeking asylum or those that want a better place to live, but also those that may have nefarious thoughts and plans. I'll be honest, guys, if there was a country that was an enemy of the United States and I was a young man and I felt like that was something that should be done, I might be, for my cause, might be willing to do the same. One of the big things, though, about this whole situation, especially with sleeper cells, is that a lot of times these people have lived here for a number of years. They work a normal job, they have families, and then all of a sudden they pop up. And that happened recently with, I believe it was in Colorado, where they had the guy been living there for a long time. He had a family, he was working, a part of the community, and then went and threw Molotov cocktails at a group of Jewish supporters. And really, Jewish centrist things like that are really high on the list of possible attacks. Now, if you're not Jewish, you may say, well, that's not really a big deal. But the problem is they equate Israel with the U.S. and with our freedoms. And so, it can go a lot of different ways. I'm going to make sure I've got a lot of things that I've got planned for you guys to talk about, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. Most of the plots, though, that have been formed have failed. Now, one of the big reasons, and this is a big one, guys, this is where things have changed over, let's say, with the Iranian, with the U.S. embassy in Iran, in Tehran, that was taken over, or even 9/11, is that one of the problems with a lot of Middle Eastern people, if they are looking for firearms, if they're looking for different type items to stockpile, it raises a red flag because here in the U.S., we've kind of got that mindset. And really, to be honest with you, it's probably kept a lot of things from happening that might happen otherwise. The big change right now is that the college campuses now have been somewhat infiltrated, and a lot of the younger people, a lot of innocent, good people that think they're doing the right thing can get caught up as just your average American citizen that you wouldn't even think anything about, to help out, to assist. And we've seen a lot of stuff with whether it was the support for Gaza or even now with support for Iran. And there's a lot of Iranian flags and that have been, shown at these college campuses. Of course, the American flag burned, and you can get yourself into a mindset that the U.S. is bad and that they deserve things. Another thing that's really something that's different from most groups is that typically jihadist, it's more of a death cult. And we've been hearing that, but really their cause is more important than their life. And so that makes things a lot different. The determination to cause issues, to cause problems is very high. And so that is something that can also play into a lot of this and really cause some problems. Again, the camps, there are different. Now, this is kind of a side note, but this was something that was done, that was found out recently, is that there were a lot of ammunition, a lot of arms, a lot of different things that were being transported actually with Hispanics, with Latin Americans, that were caught in vans with like 40,000 rounds of ammunition in a van. And it was really caught by mistake. And since that time, they found a couple of others that are going up to this one area in Colorado. So the one thing about all this is it can be done. There can be, things that are set up. There can be problems that we don't know about because people live everyday lives. The one thing about freedom is that it's freedom and you have the freedom to do. And unless you're really causing some issues, you're kind of flying under the radar. And so a lot of people, again, they get incorporated into society. They are living lives. You know them when you walk down the street and they say, hey, and you have no idea. Kind of similar to if you're a prepper and you're going along and you're, hey, how you doing? Oh, great. And then you're stocking up food, water, those kind of things. And so it's not something that you're going to necessarily telegraph. So, with that being said, what are some areas that could be potentially attacked? Well, we saw this with the Boston Marathon bombers. Two guys that just came out of nowhere, more looking European descent, and then wreaked havoc. They were lone wolves. So one of the things that can happen is a lone wolf scenario again, locked in. Um, Again, 1,750 Iranian nationalists were caught at the border. There are people that are in the country, and they're in the country illegally. In fact, they just arrested a number of Iranian nationalists just recently that had some ties, or they were just plain out illegal. They weren't supposed to be here, and they were here. Now, there have been some people that have been called up that were Iranian. There was one guy that was a Baptist minister that was caught, wasn't caught. They just interrogated him, and then they realized that he wasn't any kind of threat. But one thing about it is they can take cover from a lot of different areas. So it's a very difficult thing to decipher. It's one of the things, like after 9/11, they kind of did this no profiling. They didn't want to just profile everybody that had a certain look to them. And that's understandable because there's a lot of good people that are out there. I remember when I was in high school, the Ayatollah had just taken over. The Shah of Iran had been deposed, and a lot of Iranians came to the U.S. In fact, if you've ever watched Patrick Bet-David from Valuetainment, he's Iranian descent. And he is one of the most conservative, great guys you'll ever know. I mean, I love what he does and what his information. There's a lot of good people that have that heritage that are just there. So it's being able to decipher it. I do have a cousin that owns an office building down in downtown Greenville, and right across is an old mill, and somebody bought that old mill, and there's a lot of weird activity that's going on over there. And unfortunately for them, they are, of Middle Eastern descent. So it does make you kind of wonder, not necessarily to to accuse, but definitely to make you think about things and to watch things. So you never know when, something can happen. Now, what are some areas that are vulnerable, or what are they looking for? Where there are the soft attacks, and those are soft targets, which are typically civilians. And that would include, events, crowds. It would include malls, shopping malls. We've seen different attacks like that, especially around the world. And so things that are going on around the world could actually happen here as well. And then religious institutions, especially Jewish community centers, those kind of things, they seem to be a real sticking point for jihadists. And it's understandable why those places would be kind of picked out. College campuses, because there is a lot of sympathy, I'll put it that way, not necessarily support, but sympathy toward their ideals. They could again have allies where we wouldn't even have any idea. And so those are some kind of things that are going on. Now you have the high profile assassinations. So there's certain people that really speak out against it, maybe certain leaders. I mean, we have done that to Iran. So it's understandable that Iran could actually target U.S. citizens that are high profile, that are critical of the Iranian regime. And in the past, that's actually happened. There have been some assassinations with dissidents that have moved here, Iranian, and have been killed. So there is a potential of that. In fact, Trump himself has a somewhat of a bounty on his head from the Iranian government. Whether it's going to be carried out, whether it can possibly be carried out, that is one of the things. In fact, that's one of the most protected people in the world. And we saw during his election, there were two different attempts that weren't even connected with the Middle East, at least as far as we know. So there are potential threats to people, but those don't affect most of us. But it could if you're in that general area. And then there are military and government sites. Those places can also be hit. And of course, we try to guard those. We try to keep our eyes open. The one thing is, though, is the DHS, the Customs and Border Patrol, and FBI, again, have sent out warnings. So they're really looking for this. So there's a big alert right now, which is going to lessen the chances of any kind of effect or any kind of terrorist attack carried out. A lot of these things have been stopped way ahead of time. So what are the credibility? What is the credibility? Well, again, we've gone years without. Now, there are a number. In fact, there's a map that shows terrorist attacks that have happened in the U.S. And if you look at it in the map, there's quite a few that have happened over the years. But what are they really? Are they able to do what they really want to do? I think if they're able to get their hands on certain things, and of course the government has really kind of, even like fertilizer, that was a big thing back in with Timothy McVeigh when he destroyed the IRS building in Oklahoma. And of course there's a lot of conspiracy around that as well. But he was able to get a lot of materials and to be able to do things. One thing about what we have now is because of the internet, because there's so many ways to track a lot of things, if you are looking for certain materials or you have a presence on social media, that you're going to be watched, especially if you're searching out certain things or you're buying certain things. They're watching that as much as possible. It's not just a free reign. They can snoop on everybody, but at least they can kind of keep tabs on things. Another thing is what kind of social media do they post? If it's a lot of support for Iran, if it's a lot of support for Hezbollah and the philosophies behind it, that definitely can raise a red flag as well. And so they just, get surveillance starts. In fact, surveillance has started on a lot of different people that are potential threats. I think one of the problems that's been in the past, again, is they were afraid to profile. And so they backed off and they said, well, we can't profile. I remember, flying quite a bit right after 9/11, and, people would be in line and, you'd see some guy that was obviously Middle Eastern descent and he'd just go right through, no problem, which, whatever. Then you'd have this little old lady who was like in 70s or 80s, and she would go through and they'd do a thorough check on her, because they couldn't profile. And when I used to fly a lot, there was some high tensions a lot of times. And that was right after 9/11, to where there were certain people. In fact, I remember one time I was at an airport and I was waiting on the flight, and we were in the area just waiting to be called up. And there was a guy there. He was Middle Eastern descent. He talked really loud in Arabic, and he was on his phone. He was walking back and forth, and just loud. And you could tell that he was just trying to stir up some discomfort with everybody. I mean, finally, I went over and sat down beside him and just sat there. And he kind of toned down a little bit. But even when he got on the plane, he was blah, 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 he was just talking loud. And those things, regardless of how we want to look at it, and we don't necessarily want to look at this guy and go, he's a bad guy. I don't know the guy. I couldn't understand what he was saying either. But it was almost like, let's just stir it up. Let's just get people to kind of wondering and fearful. And I think that for me, if I was of that descent, I would be more careful, just for me, to make people feel a little more comfortable. But that's just me. So what are the probabilities, though? Honestly, we don't know. And they're usually pretty thin. But with the escalations that have gone on in Iran and the damage that we've done to their nuclear facilities, it's a pride thing, and definitely something where, we might not be able to confront them face to face, but we sure as heck can do other things. One of the things, too, which I left off, are cyber attacks. And we have seen there's a huge increase in cyber attacks already from not just Iran, but even from China and Russia, different countries, that do not have the U.S. best interest in mind. And so those kind of things also can be disruptive. All right, we're going to go to some questions here, but in just a second, I'm going to give Sarah Mack a minute. And if you have questions, which I didn't even mention, if you have some questions, please feel free to jump in. But really, as far as from tradition and what we've seen, the attacks are going to be limited typically. And it may be like in England where they have a knife attack and a guy runs out and he's, yelling, and then he starts stabbing people. The difference here in the U.S. is that guns are more accessible. And so that could be more of a shooting situation, more of assassinations. And then, of course, bombs tend to be a weapon of choice with a lot of terrorists.
Terry Hilbert asks, any thoughts on the Nebu solar generator? Just curious if you are familiar with them.
No, I don't. I do have, we have a solar generator that, and for some reason it just slipped my mind. What is our solar generator, Sarah Mac? The,
See, now you're making me have to think about it.
Boom. We have one that we are extremely happy with, and I've mentioned it a number of times here, and I can see it in my mind right now. Getting old's rough, but there are a lot of really good generators out on the market, and this is the one thing about solar. I love solar because you can put your solar panels out. You have a continuous flow. You don't have to have fuel for it. EcoFlow, thank you. EcoFlow system is what we use. We found that it was extremely useful, and it was everything we could have expected. The problem is that if you're putting a heavy load on it, the batteries will drain. You can get extra batteries, and then putting out your solar panels. But when it has a cloudy day, you're getting less, if any, real power. It trickles in, and so we found that having a gas generator to marry with a solar generator is a great way to go. And you can get like a dual fuel or tri-fuel generator, which does natural gas or propane or gasoline. To get, you can mix those with that one. And then we actually charged our EcoFlow at one point because we had a couple of days that were cloudy. It was when we had a week power out for a week during Helene. And I'm sure in Texas right now, with all that's going on there, they're facing the same kind of situations. But it allowed us to be able to piggyback on the two. So we could even generate it. And it was able to keep our refrigerator, our freezer going. And that was just the EcoFlow. So I'm a big fan of EcoFlow. I think and solar generators in general. There's some other good ones out there. But EcoFlow is the one that we've had the most experience with. We have had Jackery. We've done some stuff with a Jackery, but it was more of a smaller unit. But I think the best thing is to find a good solar unit and have a gas unit. Now, sooner or later, if there's a grid down situation, you may not be able to get fuel. So having your solar generator, at least, you may not be able to use it all the time, but you will have more access to the sun, which is your fuel, which will charge your battery. So I really like that dual system.
Nick Cower asks, howdy from Florida. Is Ruger RXM a reliable alternative to Glock 19? I saw your review and comparison videos. Curious about longer term reliability for RXM and where the cost cuts were.
The RXM it was funny, and I'd said this when I did the review. I was like, really? Ruger doing a Glock clone? What in the world? I mean, it really did. I was like, what the heck? But with Magpul and with the chassis system separates the Ruger RXM from anything else. I think you're going with the reliability and the simplicity of the Glock design, which is huge. One thing I love about the Glock design is it's simple. I can replace any parts, every part. I can do it myself. I don't need any kind of special tools. And it's not complicated. It's very simple. So putting that together with a chassis system was just a smart move. Now, there have been a lot of people that have gone through the RXM. It's been out there now for, about a year. So a lot of people have tested them. From all I've seen, it's held up extremely well. One thing that we just did, and I haven't posted the video yet, was I took the RXM and the chassis and we installed it into an Icarus precision frame. And those things are incredible. It completely changed everything about that gun. You can't do that with a standard Glock because you have to have a chassis to fit into the Icarus frame. But man, I love it. I mean, I absolutely love it. And while I love Magpul, it's not going back to Magpul. It's going to stay in that Icarus. But I'm a big fan of the RXM. And again, at first I was very skeptical. But once I got it, once we started shooting it, and we have put a lot of rounds through them. We have, and we've done some testing with the Olites. We've done some other testing. So it's tending to be a gun that we take to the range often for different things. But yeah, I would recommend the RXM.
DZ Wren says, would not having a social media presence also raise a red flag? My family does not have social media apps, which has led to awkward conversations with friends and family.
Um, well, there is a trend right now. In fact, my son's part of it. He's just deleted all of his apps because he just said, I'm on there too much. I'm on there just way too much. There may be some blind spots that come up, but usually you kind of fly under the radar when you're not using a lot of apps, when you're not on social media. And social media does point a lot of things. It reinforces what you're looking at, your philosophies, your ideas, and it just reinforce. The problem is you've got those different apps that are reinforcing their ideas. And so it's making it very difficult to have a dialogue with opposing views, because we get so much information supporting our side that we don't even listen to the other side. I would recommend that every once in a while you listen to something that you don't really necessarily agree with and just understand where they're coming from. Doesn't mean you have to accept it. Obviously you don't, but looking at it, it may change a little bit of the vibrato of the information that you're being fed all the time. But I don't think that, I think not having a social media presence makes it more difficult for them to follow. And if I were a sleeper cell, that would be my modus operandi. I would not be logging in to, jihadist in America or whatever. So I doubt that it probably costs, like my parents. My parents are in their 80s. They don't, they still have flip phones. So I don't think they're under investigation. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Savagely asks, how is your Ruger Alaskan doing?
It's doing great. It's doing great. We've been talking about getting it back out and getting out the 454 Casull. You have to take that in doses, but I'm going to tell you, honestly, that is one more fun gun to shoot. After 6 rounds through a cylinder, though, you're ready to put it down for a little while, or switch to 45 Colt and kind of have some fun, because it's a big, heavy gun. But it definitely has a kick and it has some power. But it's not like, I'm not going to say it's not painful, because it is a little painful, but not too bad. Not too bad. I still enjoy shooting it. Okay, let's go to our next part. One thing I didn't mention, which I should have at the beginning, because I got right into it, is Exotac. They sponsor us, and they make the best fire starters on the market. I mean, they're just so innovative, and they're down in Winder, Georgia. They make all the components there. And some of the best ferrocerium rods, their fire sleeve, which goes over your Bic lighter. It helps protect it. And they do a lot of other things. And you need a fire kit. A fire kit will boil your water, cook your food, give you light, give you heat, keep predators at bay. And it just builds morale. Nice to have a little fire going. Maybe you might even sing a song. So, but Exotac gives 20% off using Suits20. With the link down below in the description. And I know a lot of you guys have bought these. They even have a little tool roll that you can put it together and make a nice fire kit. Redundancy is very important with a fire. Another thing that I like to recommend is the Modern Survival Guide for the Coming Economic Collapse. And this is about actual events that happened in Argentina and for FOWL. And there's a link down below in the description, because we kept talking about this book. We put a link down there so people could find it. But one thing to really add to your survival library, which I am a huge supporter of, I think you need to have a library. You need to have hard books. You need to have copies where, in case all your power's out, you've got something to reference. And so that's just a great book. A great book is something that I bought many of and given out to friends. So, and also check out suitsgear.com. That's our website. And we do giveaways every month. All right. So now let's talk about some preparedness. One thing about it is situational awareness. It's vital. And really, situational awareness should be part of the way you do things on an everyday basis. If I go to a store, I'm just mindful of what's going on around me. I try not to get on my phone and block out everything. I try to kind of stay aware, looking for different potentials. If something's strange, if something's a little out of the ordinary, I'm watching for that. That should be the way you do things anyway, because there are people out there that will take advantage of you being a sheep and you being asleep. And so being aware makes you a harder target. It allows you to see things ahead of time. And as they always say, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. Had a buddy that actually not the guy, but a buddy of mine who was a law enforcement. He said that one of the guys was walking in, law enforcement guy was walking into a store and he was going to buy some gum, and he was a little gas station, and he's counting his change as he walks in, and then he looks up and a dude has a shotgun in his face. When you walk into a store, look, just examine what's going on. If the employees look like they're petrified, then turn around and walk away. But being situational awareness is vital, especially when things could be a little bit out of cue. And so just being aware of your surroundings, and it's like what we call yellow. It's just I'm aware, I'm looking around, I'm noting, but I'm not worried. I'm not on high alert. I'm just living life. I'm not paranoid. I'm just looking at things, seeing what's going on. And then you go up to to orange, which means, oh, this is strange. This is something I need to be paying attention to. And you're kind of watching and you're looking and you're kind of thinking, okay, I have my concealed carry on, or what am I going to do to get out of this situation? Where do I need to go? And then there's red, and that's when it's on. It's on like Donkey Kong, and you just got to go ahead and take action and not be the victim. And that's a big thing about situational awareness. White means you're just white. You don't even know what's going on. You're just living your day and nothing's bothering you. You're not even paying attention to nobody because it doesn't matter, but it does matter. So pay attention. So situational awareness is one of the first elements in a terrorist situation. If you start looking and somebody's doing some things, they're acting strange, they're walking around funny, and they're back and forth, and they're talking loud, pay attention to that and know. Another thing is if you start to see strange activities, let's say that you're at your home and there's a neighbor that's doing some really strange things, and you don't want to sit there and rat out your neighbor on everything they do. You don't. But if it's something that you feel like that could be a potential threat, you need to be aware and you need to report it. You could be downtown. You could be shopping. You could be at the mall. You could just see something going on and you could say, this isn't right. I don't like the way that person's doing. They're doing something really abnormal, and you just need to be aware. And if that is something that could lead to some kind of terror type attack, then you need to be mindful. Just because somebody's weird and they're walking down and they're wearing some purple pants and they've got these big clown shoes on, you don't report them, but you do notice. Okay, carry, your concealed carry. And guys, I have friends that have concealed carry permits, or you may live in a constitutional carry state like we do, and you can carry, but you don't. Maybe it's a professional, maybe it's your business, maybe it's work. You can't do it there. But when you're out and about and you're with your family and you're the protector, and you need to have your concealed carry. Now, for me, and this is one thing that I addressed, I carry anyway. I carry every day. It doesn't matter. When I'm at the house, I'm carrying. When I'm at the pool, I have my carry in a little off-body carry, which is usually a little fanny pack that I have my phone and stuff in. And so I just try to have everything around because you never know when something can happen. So you can't really plan it. You can't say, okay, we're going out to dinner tonight. I think there's going to be a problem, so I'm going to carry my gun. Think about it, carry. And then for me, I've been carrying the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 2.0. Well, it's in 380. It carries 10 rounds or 12 rounds, and it's so light and easy to carry. But because things kind of heightened up a little bit, I thought I want to carry something a little more effective. So I went back to my 9mm, and I'm carrying it, and I'm making sure that I do carry my extra magazine. Maybe I want something even a little larger. And because the thing is the smaller it is, the harder it is to control. That little 380, it doesn't have hardly any recoil, and it's great, and I love it. But I want to step it up because I may need, if it's a determined attacker, and that's one of the differences. A lot of times with people that are just, trying to rob you or trying to harass you or whatever, they're not necessarily determined. That's just their attitude. But when you have someone that feels like it's a sacred cause, you need to really think about it because those people do not go down easy. So that's the one thing you want to do is to up your concealed carry, make it more effective. Now, second thing is this medical. Medical is vital, and a trauma kit, not just Band-Aids and some gauze. This is with your tourniquet It has chest seals. It has hemostatic gauze, which will stop the bleeding. It's a real bona fide trauma kit. One I would highly recommend is amp3.net. USN Doc, who has a really large channel here on YouTube, but he was a Portland emergency room doctor, and he puts together a lot of different kits. And one that he has is his little EDC kit, which is an EDC trauma kit. I showed that in the sleeper cell video that we did, which I will have that annotated so you can check that out because there's a lot of details to it. But that little kit is great, and it just fits in your pocket. It's a bare bones kit, but it'll give you something. And the one thing to think is not just for you, but also if you're with your family. If something were to happen and they were hurt or injured to a point to where they're losing a lot of blood, you want to make sure that you have a good trauma kit, the tools you need to treat that. Or it could be you're just out somewhere and there could be innocent bystanders, people that are there, and you help them. And so just being someone that is out to help, and that's very important, guys. We're kind of losing that here in this country. And then know your exits. You walk into a big restaurant, you know the door you came into, but how do you get out if that door is blocked? Or if there's someone standing in the door doing something crazy? How do you get you and your family out? For me, whenever I go anywhere, whether it's church, whether it's an event, wherever it is, I'm looking for exits just to make note. I'm not freaking out. I don't want to be next to it. I mean, when I fly on a plane, I like to be next to the door, next to the exit. Number one, you get more leg room, but I like to be next to the exit, mainly because of more leg room. But sitting there, if you're kind of committing yourself to help, which I would want to help anyway. So it just gives me a place to be. But on airplanes, that's one thing. When it's events or venues or large buildings or the mall even, what are the exits? Make mental note of it. Think, okay, that's an exit. There have been stampedes in the past and people have been trampled because they're going right back out the area that they came in. Look for some alternate ways to get out. And this is a big one, is to stay informed. If you're informed on what's going on around you with local, if there's some things that are going on, maybe there's an alert that comes out, you can check that. One thing, I'll say this, guys, because sometimes there have been alerts that have gone out in the past. Let's say a flash flood alert. And I would say, okay, well, I'm going to be careful, to not go driving around. But like in Texas, they put out this alert and they said, hey, you people need to leave. And maybe some people didn't even get the memo. They didn't even hear about it because they weren't keeping up and staying informed with their local events. Man, we can stay informed with what's going on worldwide, and we can stay informed on what the political situation is, but we've got to take those things a little more seriously. One time I was staying down in Watkinsville, Georgia. I was at an Airbnb. I was going to Georgia Bushcraft. And while I was there, the landlord called me and said, hey, just to let you know, there is a boil order with the water. Well, I would never have known it otherwise if they hadn't called me. So it led me to think, wherever I am, keep up with local events, keep up with what's going on, kind of be mindful of it. And know that there could be some problems. You don't want to drink water that's, has uranium in it or something. And you want to be able to stay informed. Or sometimes there are situations where there are protests that are planned or things that are going on. And you want to be aware of where those are and avoid them unless you want to be a part of them. But again, local is very important. And sometimes we kind of miss that unless it's weather. But if the people in Texas maybe had taken it more seriously, that the danger was real. It was the same thing with Helene. A lot of the people that were in the mountains of Helene, up in the western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee mountains, and we lived up there for 20 years. So I can imagine if there had come over a notice saying, hey, this hurricane's coming through and there's possible flooding and blah, 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 I would have been like, oh, okay. And I wouldn't have done anything. I would have stayed at home just like everybody else. Unfortunately, when the foundations of your house give way and your house slides down a mountain, you didn't take it serious enough. So I think that sometimes we dismiss things, and I think we need to watch it. So same thing with this, guys, you don't want to dismiss the possible or the possibility of sleeper cells being activated. You don't want to just dismiss it and go, it ain't going to happen. Chances are, may not happen. But just like with in Texas or Helene or other things, sometimes those warnings come and we need to take heed to them. Do we need to get crazy? No. One thing that I would suggest is if things start to ratchet up is to stay away from large events, maybe big celebrations or protests that are going on downtown. Last weekend, they had a big thing in our town in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a big event, street event, and then they had a kind of a parade, and it was the 4th of July. So yes, that is a possibility that there could be something. And we have a technical school here that we had a lot of Middle Eastern descent people that came here. That's okay, great, but it's good to be mindful. It's good to know what your surroundings are. And be ready if something really kind of looks really suspicious, is to be willing to say, hey, I'm very concerned about what's going on over there. And, you call the authorities. There are hotlines for DHS, FBI, that you can call, and you can report those things if it's something. But here's the thing, guys, please don't harass good people. If someone's just out there and you just kind of looking at them, you're like, I don't know, maybe they could be a terrorist. Please don't harass people. Make sure that it's something that you kind of go, I'm kind of concerned about that. And so that's, but the big thing is, guys, is just up your game a little bit. Up your situational awareness up just a touch. Not only could it save lives, your life, and maybe the life of your family, but it could possibly save others. Especially if there's law enforcement around and there's something going on, you go, hey, I'm not trying to be nosy or anything, but I think this guy's doing some weird things. I think you need to keep an eye on him. And it might be something simple like that. And he may just be drunk and having a good time. All right. So if we have some more questions, we will take them now.
Gladly Encouraging My Sisters says, question, what special preparations do you recommend if you have to bug out with elderly parents?
That's a tough one. That is a very tough one, and one close to my heart. My parents are in their 80s, and they live right here next door to us. And so we moved them down here so we could take care of them. Mobility, there's no way. I mean, there is no way that they're going to be mobile. With that being said, evacuation starts to get really narrow unless you're in a vehicle. Now, if you're in a vehicle, and let's be honest, guys, bugging out is just a glorified refugee. And really, bugging out should not be, your primary should not be, I've got my bug out bag, I'm ready to hit the woods. That should not be your primary. Your primary, aside from bunkering in and staying where you are, is to have a means of transportation. You really need to have some way to drive, to go, because walking is really a nightmare. In fact, I'll give you something to think about. Where is your bug out location? So first, you need to have a destination. Next, how long will it take you to get there? By car, but then again, take out your phone, put in maps, and see how long it will take you to walk there. You will be astounded. We were 4 hours away at the beach, and I did a video on this. We were 4 hours away at the beach. I just looked to see how long it would take me to walk to my destination back home. And 4 hours is like, oh, well, it'll probably take you a week or two. No, it'll take you a month or two. Do you have enough food? Do you have enough supplies to get you through that period? No, you can't carry that much food. So you've got to be realistic about it. You've got to look and say, look, my parents are not going to make it through the woods, or, and it's according to their age. But even then, there's only so much that they're going to be able to do. So you have to make a plan around that. Listen, guys, if my house burns down, I have no other choice. Guys, if we have a horde of people come to our house, we have to bug out. But know the realities of it. And another thing is typically if people are moving from one area to the other, you go out on the freeway and the highways will be locked down. I know when we have big hurricanes coming. We've been on the coast and we had to evacuate the coast, and it was a nightmare just getting out. And people were fairly calm and they were moving, but they were moving very slow. The roads are not set up. The infrastructure of our highway system is not set up for a mass migration. So having some thoughts about it and really what is it that's going to cause me to leave? Where is it that we can go that's close? What is our alternative? And having a place, especially with elderly parents, you need to have a place that's going to be fairly close to be able to get them out of the immediate danger, but maybe into an area where they can ride it out. And then hopefully you can go back to your immediate. Bunkering in to me is really the only real answer to survival. Once you hit the road with bugging out, your chances of survival start to dwindle, or your chances of all of you making it out. So keep that in mind. It's one thing. It's one thing when we're prepping and we're thinking, oh, I've got this, I've got that, I'm good, I'm ready, I'm prepared. But sometimes we need to look at the eventualities. One thing that we do is we have water rain catchment systems and we have water. The problem is there is acetone in the shingles. Now, the next answer would be to get metal roofs if you're going to have that. But here's the thing. I was talking to a good friend of mine this past weekend about it. And that's one of the things that he talked about is that acetone. And I said, how do you get it out? He says, you can filter it out. He goes, but you have to really have a certain system. But he said, here's the key. Having water, period, whether it has acetone in it or not, is going to keep you alive longer than not drinking any water. So, there are degrees of survival. Yes, maybe acetone may have some long-term effects if I'm drinking it. But if I'm going to be dead in 3 or 4 days from lack of water, I drink the acetone water. Now, it's not just full of acetone. That would kill you, but just little particles. So it can be a trade-off. And when you are in a bug out situation, nutrients, not just a bunch of beef jerky, that's going to start to cause problems with you after a number of days. But having the right balance, guys, it takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of planning, and you have to go around your situation. So I know that was kind of a dark answer, but again, if I had, and I do have elderly parents, my bug out plan is going to be close, if possible. If we have to go farther, we have to go farther.
CN asks, question, in terms of food preservation, would you choose canning over dehydration?
Yes, canning. I mean, up front, canning is a great way to be able to preserve a lot of the not only just the integrity of your meat and your vegetables and all those things, and they are packed typically in water or some kind of you know liquid. So you also have that as well. But I think that dehydration is also something that needs to marry in with your canning. Dehydration is going to, especially with meats or fruits, things like that. It gives you some extra time, but it doesn't give you as much time as the canning. The canning you can store that longer. So the dehydration is great. We did a video on beef jerky. How long will beef jerky last? And really, it's about 3 months. It's not a massive long-term situation, and that's without the bag being open. So once you start doing that, then it starts to degrade. So canning just in itself is a more long-term option to me, makes it more preferable. But I think dehydration or salting your meats and things like that, or different methods, I think that you need to look at a number of different ways, not just one over the other. But to me, primarily canning would be a better option. On the other side, for production, for packaged stuff already, just canned food will last for 100 years because of the the ways they produce it, the heat processes they use to seal up the cans, and the liners that they put in the cans that they used to not do. So your food still tastes good. It doesn't taste like a tin can. And so we go heavy on, and it's heavy, a lot of canned meats. We do a lot of dehydrated stuff. We have maybe a year's supply of dehydrated, but then canning is something that we can supplement.
Patriots Rage asked, Don, did you finish my book, The Intrepid?
I did. I did. It was great. In fact, I've had it sitting here in fact, I let a buddy of mine read it. One of my buddies is a doctor, and he and I trade books a lot. And in fact, I even did a draft to tell you how much I love that book. And let me say something. This is The Intrepid. It's funny. The one thing is it's not about guns blazing and loads of violence. It's really cool how that it's set up, and I am very excited. I see where the end though is going to be. Looks like some things are getting ready to happen. So if you haven't checked it out, Intrepid, great book. And now I can't remember. Is it Ben? Ben, I can't remember. I can't remember your name now. All of a sudden, because I had it down. I don't have the book here again. I've given it to Ben Cook. Seems like, but anyway, Intrepid, The Intrepid, great book, and I believe he's going to be working on some sequels to that book. So thanks for stopping by. But very impressed. Love the way you did that. This one guy's in a town, and it's his story about what he does once they have full economic collapse. And then the other story is about a guy leaving college and trekking it home to Oklahoma. And very well done. Very well.
Cynthia Allen asked, question, what is the best police scanner app?
I don't know. I have one, that I've used, and it's just one that I got. Yeah, I don't know. But that is something that's smart to have. Now, a lot of them have a lot of code words, and they're encrypted. Some of the things they're talking about, which makes sense. But if you have a law enforcement friend, he might be able to give you some tips. But yes, that is a great thing to have. I think you should have one, a police scanner. You kind of know what's going on. But I'm not up on the best, but I do have one on my phone. And I was at a buddy of mine's house this weekend. He had a couple sitting out. It was pretty cool. So police scanners give you an idea. One thing I would recommend is going to like your neighborhood watch or one of those things that, reports crime in an area, and look at the map of where incidents have happened around you. And it is eye-opening. We don't know what's going on around us. We live in our bubble. We live in our world. We might see something on the news. But the one thing I've got that's a little bit different is I have a really good friend of mine that works for the county sheriff's department that's in my area, and he's a buddy of mine. And he has called me twice about fugitives actually running down our road. He said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. There's a fugitive with a gun running down your road right now, and we're after him. So making friends with law enforcement is also a good thing to have, and especially if they know you and they know where you live, because they can give you a heads up. Okay, it's 1:00. All right, guys. Well, again, this isn't a doom and gloom that the sleeper cells are going to break out everywhere and everything's going to happen. But there is a possibility, and it's a heightened possibility. And with the border being so wide open for the past 4 years and a number of different people that have come into our country that kind of align with that mindset, we need to at least be vigilant. And that's probably the best thing to be vigilant, situational awareness, being prepared with the tools you need, having a good trauma kit, carrying your firearm, having a good flashlight, just the different things that can get you through, just up your EDC. And again, a big thank you to Exotac. You get 20% off using Suits 20, best fire tools on the market. And whether you go with Exotac or not, get yourself a good fire kit. It's vital. Fire is primeval. I mean, that is something that man has had from the beginning. And while we can flip on a light, we don't realize that's fire. When we turn on the heat, that's fire. Even when you turn on the air conditioning, there is electricity that goes, and we depend on that so much. But having a fire kit at least will get you through a survival situation. And of course, the Survival Guide to the Coming Economic Collapse by Fowl, link down below in the description, and great book to add to your library. And suitsgear.com, check it out, sign up for our giveaway, which we just finished one. We're getting ready to start another, so it'd be a great time to jump over there. And we have a lot of other stuff and swag and all that going on. Just helps us to keep doing what we're doing. And a big thank you to Sarah Mack for being over at the computer and getting us through the little technical difficulties that we had right at the beginning. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic.